Well, the title of this session is, What are the Three Principles?
You know?
So, we've heard that question before, right?
I'm hoping you know, because
Oh, he's hoping that. We've got seats here in the front. He does now? What? What's that?
I'm answering his question.
Oh, that I know?
thank God, I don't know what I'm doing up there.
Now, this session, at least in my mind, is really not so much for me to impart my brilliance, which is good enough, but really more so that you should feel, or should at least have some of your questions answered in a way that are satisfying for you.
I thought you were going to say it's for me to impart my brilliance.
That too. So even before we kind of get into like what are the three principles, I think, to do with you, are there any questions at all besides that are on your mind? And I'd like to hear them all. Would you like to hear them?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, we've got a question.
Okay.
I'd like to know how you could be happy when something really bothers you and you can't change it. For example, if you hear something from the next door neighbor, like music, and it just makes you a headache and you can't change it. So how could you feel, how could you tell your mind that this is, make it, settle it in or whatever, or ignore it or tune out? How?
Great question. To begin to answer, I'd like to remind everybody, get comfortable. So, no, really, I mean it, like, get comfortable. Because no answer that I give you, an answer that we would try to share with you that's going to try to break through, it's hard enough if you're calm and relaxed. So get comfortable. But that's a great question. I had that question for a long, long time. Even after I heard Dick and Benjer speak for 5, 6, 7, 8 times, still had that question. So it's a good question. Any other questions? Anything, really?
I'm really hopeful because I had that question for a long time ago, Rabbi Mark cleared it for me last day. So
Oh boy, well, thank you. Wow.
I don't know what you said, but something.
Neither do I. Wow. It is a biggie.
Yeah. Anything else? Questions about who's going to win the Super Bowl?
Oh, Seahawks.
Not the Seahawks.
Watch it, buddy.
So go ahead, you want to take a stab at that question?
Wow, that's a biggie. Light question. It's a great question. I mean, it certainly is, I think, one that would be on the minds of a lot of people. If it even occurred to them that it could even be a question, because I think so many people probably just assume there's no way that I can be okay if my world isn't okay, if things aren't going the way that I need them to be going. That's the way we tend to think about things. And so what the principles, I think, does for people is really reorients their paradigm. And when I say paradigm, I mean their understanding, their model. And everybody's got an understanding, everybody's got a way of thinking about life and why they are the way they are and why things are the way they are. And one of the, I think, most common assumptions, shared paradigm out there in the world is that there is clearly a connection between the things that are happening to me in my life, be it the people in my world, my places, the things, the events, right? And how I'm feeling inside, right? Which is, I think, the basis of your question, correct? How can I be okay inside? Because the feeling of happiness is a feeling that takes place inside of me. When something in my world, something in my life is really going against what I like to have happen. And so what the principles introduces is a different paradigm, a different way of understanding how feelings, how an inside experience of an emotion, or even just a perception, how that actually comes about, how that actually happens. Because we don't give a lot of thought to that. We're in our lives, and our lives are are going on, the minute we wake up, our eyes open, bing, and even when we're sleeping, we're dreaming, but we wake up, eyes open, and we're off to the races, and life happens, and we're in the middle of it. And so I never gave it a lot of thought. I shouldn't say a lot of thought, I don't think I gave it any thought, as to what exactly is this thing that I call my life? Not a small question, pretty significant question. And the principles was the first, when I became exposed to the principles, it was the first time somebody raised that question and raised the visibility of that. Hey, take a look at that. And I realized what I had been assuming, and I've discovered since is what I'm not unique in this assumption, is that the things that are in my life that are happening are what make me happy or sad, or grateful or ungrateful, or any of the other emotions of which there are dozens and dozens that we could probably list, that those things are caused by my outside life. And the principles introduced to me a radical concept, which is that actually what goes on inside of me has nothing to do with what's going on in the world. How's that one then? It's a different way.
See, yes, I know, it's a very hard thing to really believe.
Okay, great. So yes, it wasn't something that I said, oh yeah, great, sign me up for that. I'll take more of that. It was something that I started to consider though. I started to look around. Because you're right. It's not something that you necessarily just hear and say, oh yeah, sure. But on some level, what I started to do was to take a look at that, because one thing I did see, one thing that was clear to me, which was, if that is true, that's a pretty radical, mind-blowing, and very, very significant idea, very significant way of seeing things. If that's really what's going on, then boy, I've been really missing the boat to some degree. And I started to observe. I know I'm an observant Jew, but I wasn't always so observant when it came to my own life. And I started to become a little more observant when it came to my inner life, which was already something, by the way, which was already an accomplishment, because when you live in the world of what's going on out there is what causes what's going on in here, then you spend a lot of time looking at what's going on out there, because you got to get all your ducks in order, right? My ducks have to be in order, otherwise I can't be okay. So this opened up the possibility of, hey, wait a second, maybe I'm looking in the wrong direction. Maybe I should be looking right here. And so I started to look here, and I started to notice things. So it wasn't about me signing up to somebody else's program. It was about me starting to notice that, wait a second. Like I would notice things like, I just saw this recently, that's a good example. Like I sometimes find myself saying, in my professional life, for example, if I only had more clients, I'd be so secure, I'd be so happy. If I only, saw these results, I'd be feeling so much more comfortable. I'd be feeling, just feeling great. And I started to notice, like I noticed this recently, a few weeks ago, a bunch of my ducks got in line. Like a bunch of things that I was sort of if-onlying actually started happening. And I was thinking, oh great. And then I noticed there's that same feeling. That same insecure feeling is still there. And I started having experiences like that were really starting to point to me something that I had never seen before, but was way beyond what people were telling me as a theory. It was actually observable. It's actually, because it should be, right? If we're telling you this is what's behind your experience, and your experience is happening all the time, we should be able to see some of this. We should be able to get in touch with some of this. But that's the idea, I think, that the principles introduces, that is paradigm shifting and life changing. Spiro, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I'd like to say that Rabbi Harris, there he goes. Well, I'm just remembering. I'm trying to remember back. I'm trying to put myself, you try to think about what it was like, what it felt like to be when you were 6. Right, so what was it like before you had kids? Or what was it like at a different time in life than you are right now? It's really hard even for us to imagine what was really going through our minds, what that experience was like. For sure when it comes to previous generations, what was going on in their minds, what their experiences were. But I'm trying to remember what it was like before I had an inkling about what the principles are. And when I first started hearing about the words and the questions that I had, and what was my misunderstanding back then when I had the same question about how could I possibly feel good if life is rotten? Principles I hin, principles I hear. That's kind of Yiddish for principles there, principles there. You got this right here. What are you going to do? Okay. And I remember at one point, I don't remember exactly when, but somewhere along the way, I learned and I realized beyond the words of it that the principles were not a technique, so that I didn't know, but I was innocently approaching the principles as I approached everything else in my life. And when it came to trying to help myself, I was looking for a solution. So I had a problem, and I was looking for an answer. And the answer could have been something to do, to say, or to think that would fix a problem that was going on out there. And once the problem got fixed, whatever intervention that I kind of did to change what was going on that was causing the problem, I could then feel better. And I thought the principles were the same type of approach. I just had to think. I'd blow it up on a big board and hang it on my wall with a nice frame, mind, consciousness, and thought. And maybe another photograph over here of Sydney Banks smiling. And then I would take care of everything. But that didn't work, not because I didn't understand the principles, because I didn't understand that it was coming from a completely different paradigm. All I can say today is that I don't remember exactly when I got this question answered, or any of the other many questions that I had about the principles, when they got answered for me. But they got answered, and I think it was due to the fact that, to some extent, that I stayed in the conversation. And the changes that showed up in my life, and I'm not nearly grateful enough for them, happened almost as a surprise. Not because I did something, like I applied the principles, like a cream on my foot or something. It was, there was something going on that was changing the way that I saw the world. Not that I was changing it. I wasn't thinking more positively as a technique to be better. It was happening to me. I was waking up one day, and I did a lot of work with Keith Blevins, just one-on-one, and his wife Alden. And I remember I would ask them over and over specific questions about choice and principles. And I must ask them the same question 20 times over a year-long period. I can't remember any one episode where I asked the question and I got an answer. But today I have an answer. Like, those questions are not questions for me anymore. That's kind of how it works. So it's a little unsatisfying if you think you're going to change your life. That's the first thing I'd like to say. Is that paradigmatically, how the principles are going to help you it's going to happen to you. It's going to show up for you. It's not going to be something that you're going to do. The fact is that you feel your thinking. You're going to feel your thinking. So if you're thinking about a situation that it's rotten, you're going to feel that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And no one's telling you here, not in this room or any other room, that you shouldn't be feeling that way. Now, you can try that as long as you want. It won't work. If you think a certain way about something, you can pretend to yourself that it's not that way. You can positive think yourself all you want. It's gonna hit up against the way you really think about it, and you're gonna continue feeling rotten. But what happens for people is somewhere, somehow, they have evolution about how they see something. No one knows when it happens, no one knows why it happens, but it happens. Evolution happens. And evolution happens more, when I say evolution, I mean the way you see something The way you inherently understand the nature of something changes. That we all evolve. None of us see the world the same way we do when we were 6. And hopefully, you don't see the world the same way you did a year ago. Hopefully you evolve within the way you look at yourself. You've discovered things about yourself, you have opinions about yourself, you have opinions about the way you think, well, business works this way. Well, that changes for you over time when your thinking changes. Not that you change it, but the way you really see things changes. And when you understand that that's what's going on, there's benefits because you can get on board with the fact that that's how it works. And one day you'll wake up and you'll take a look at a situation that was bothering you for decades possibly. Every time that guy walked in the room, oh my God, I was to the moon, right? And then one day he walked in the room and he's like, oh, that's funny. I don't feel that way about him anymore. Like I can see, I don't know, he was just making a mistake or something. I don't know what you're gonna think in that moment. But the way you see things changes. Now, if you believe that the way that you see things is created and generated by the way things are, there's no room for evolution unless that thing changes. And you're gonna be stuck with it if that's how you think it works. If you believe that the way you feel about something is beholden to the way that it is inherently, well then, you're going to be stuck with it. But once you begin to get a glimpse of the fact that it just doesn't work that way, not only do different people experience the same thing in different ways, but even you, at 5 o'clock, might feel a certain way about it, and at 7, you're feeling a little bit different. Even you, in the things the way you feel about certain situations, it kind of fluctuates. And it's just going on being whatever it's being, it hasn't changed. But you're fluctuating. When you get on board with the fact that it's an internal process that is creating your experience in the moment, you allow for the natural evolution process to happen within you more often, more readily. And a lot of things begin to fall off your mind. They could mention a bunch of them. Blame becomes, as much as I really like blaming people, because it takes the burden off of me, but it's not true, darn it. I wish it was true. I wish I could blame people for the way things are, but it just isn't true. And when that occurs to you, it's like, wow, it's just not true. The way you can't make me feel anyway, unless I think about it in a certain way. Well, that might change the way I relate to how I feel about blaming people at all. Now, I still get full of blame, often. But it isn't very long before I start to feel a little silly about it. I still get really upset, really constricted, really angry, really upset about circumstances. Just like you, that doesn't stop happening. What changes when you begin to understand or get an appreciation for the way it works is that you get reminded more often. You fall out of your illusion or your delusion about what's causing your issue, and you begin to get pointed back to the way that it's really being created. And all those other things that you had to really, really worry about begin to fall off your mind. That's just one benefit. Any questions about what I or Mark have said?
How is that really different than Stephen Covey's definition of responsibility is that you have the ability to choose your response?
First, I was thinking, about blame. I just wanted to say that if you don't get anything out of this, it's his fault. I still blame. I love that. Wide shoulders.
Can I just say something?
Well, he just wants.
Yeah, he has a question. So, Stephen Covey, I know I'm familiar with 7 Habits, and so he says that you have the responsibility because you have the ability to choose how you respond.
Yeah.
Which is a classic definition of responsibility.
Yeah.
And so the way the challenge with what Stephen Covey is putting out there, because it's not just Stephen Covey. It's something that I encounter pretty frequently when I talk about the principles with people, because when you expose people to the idea that really the experience you're having is not happening out there, it's happening inside of you. You're experiencing your own personal reality, okay, and of course, what the principles really does is just explain how that happens to some degree, because we still don't really understand how it happens, but at least gives us some sense of how that happens, which is that we think, and our thinking comes to life, because we have a gift that brings thought to life, and we experience our thinking as though it's not thinking, it feels like the world, which is really good at what we do. And so a lot of folks come back sort of with that similar idea, which is, okay, since I'm the thinker behind my experience, well then I have this responsibility. I can sort of, choose to think differently. Which is theoretically true, because we are suggesting that if one does have a different thought about something, they may have a very different feeling about it, a different experience of it. That is true. What we're pointing at, though, is we're not here to point to teach you how to control your experience. This is not what we're here to. If anybody's coming here because they want to learn how to guide themselves seamlessly through their lives, feeling fabulous all the time, and always, right on point emotionally, you're not in the right place, because none of us know how to do that, number one. That's the bad news. But the good news is, what we found, the reason we're so passionate about what we're teaching, is we found that that's not what life is about, and it's certainly not necessary to have a steering wheel to control how I'm feeling in order to actually have a better functioning and a better experience of life. What we're here to talk about is simply, how do we understand it? What is our understanding of what's behind what we experience on a moment-to-moment basis? And what we're suggesting is that that understanding in and of itself is really what's helpful. And it's a tough thing for some people to grasp, because we like tools and techniques and the 5 points of X, and okay, great. But what we're suggesting is when we start to get a deeper internalization or realization or insight, or whatever word works for you, around this issue of what's behind the human experience, we're really talking on a very philosophical level, what's behind all of our experiences, what makes us all the same, that in and of itself is helpful, because it helps us from falling into the trap that we all fall into otherwise, which is what I just described earlier, which is this outside-in thinking, which Tzvi pointed out. Once you think the outside is sort of where it's at, then you've got very limited say in terms of how happy you're going to be or any other emotion, because those folks out there have got to cooperate, and they don't. What the principles points to is that when we have a different relationship with our experience, as opposed to trying to change our experience, let me repeat that again. We're not here to change our experience. We're not here to tell you how to change your experience, as Spiro pointed out. We're not going to tell you don't feel this. Baruch Hashem, God has created a world with wonderful feelings. My son just recovered from cancer, and he had radiation, and one of the side effects was he lost his taste. God willing, very temporary. You have no idea how terrible it is to not, can you imagine if eating was as difficult as exercising? I've got to put nutrition in my body and it tastes like metal, okay? And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking how lucky we are, but I was also thinking, isn't it a wonderful gift that we can taste our life? God gives us the capacity to taste all these emotions, are little tastes of life, and they're all part of that dish called life. So we're not here to tell you not to have it, but we are suggesting is that when your understanding changes, there's a beautiful, healthy capacity that you were born with, that you don't need to meddle with at all. Keep your fingers off of it. Keep your grubby fingers off of it. It's working beautifully. And when our relationship with our experience shifts and we start to have an understanding about what's really behind it, and this is just how I'm explaining what happened to me, is that I started to discover a lot of healthy, good stuff that nice feelings, nice kind of calmness in the face of things that I never would have thought possible. I mean, I don't have time right now to talk about it, but I mean, I constantly amaze myself, and it's not because I'm patting myself on the head, it's not me. I amaze myself at what the Almighty put into me. I could not believe I could go through this and feel the way I feel. That's the gift that's inside you already, that you start to see and you start to taste when you start to realize what's behind the human experience. And so you don't need to take responsibility in the sense of, okay, I'm going to start managing my thinking. What you do need to take responsibility is, I'm behind my thinking. Seeing that. Does that make sense? I don't know if I answered your question.
Let's think about it.
You have to think about it. Okay, good.
Well, he already answered my
We
question.
love it when that happens.
Because he actually set an example with his son, which was my situation with my daughter. Not the same illness, but something similar. And I feel that I have learned through her attitude of frustration sometimes because of her illness. I have learned to deal better, to be more flexible with that character that she have come to build now that she is sick. So I really identified myself. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know if I should.
Well, how much time do
So
we
I have a question. So you're basically not saying to do positive thinking, I see, because you're basically, you don't guide us like in which way we should think. So how could we actually change the way we think if we're not thinking positive?
That's what I was trying to address.
I don't understand. Let's say the issue that I still have, it still bothers me, and I blame the other person. Now, this neighbor claims that she could live her life. On the other hand, I hear everything through and I get so bothered by it, and it really hurts me that I blame her and I'm upset at her, but it's not her fault, because she could lead her life. You understand what I'm saying? How can I possibly be happy, even though I think, I think I should be, what should I think? You're guiding me not to think positively or negatively about a situation, right? You're not guiding me what to do. I have to think, so how should I think to be happy?
You haven't yet discovered, or at least you haven't yet recognized what you have inside of you yet. And that's what we're hoping you're going to
So
see.
what do I have, like every person has? Everybody has a mind, thinking, and they're conscious and aware of what's going on in life, right?
Mhm.
So what else am I, like every human nature, missing? I know what every person has, right?
I share a story with you? Yeah.
No, I want to see how I could become happy with this, like how I could become more calm and relaxed about it, about that situation.
Can I try to help her?
Well, I prefer not, but if you have a question or if,
So do it after me.
Yeah, I had such a experience.
Yeah?
Perfect.
Mm.
Peggy, you sure you don't want to say what's on?
Maybe I should. I think what people are talking about is the after of life. The question about Stephen Covey and this question, people are referring to, life happened to me, how can I change how I feel about it? And I think what the principles point to is what happens before life.
Yeah.
What happens, what?
Before life.
And I think this is great, because this brings us to what this session was really supposed to be about. Well, it's been about it the whole time, but we're supposed to answer the
I just want to share one
question.
little story about this. That, you know, let's say if I have a belief that my husband is stingy, then I'm always going to be trying to manage my response to that in the case of Stephen Covey, or I'm going to try to change my feelings about it, as in her example. But if I am open to recognizing that I am doing something within myself if I believe that he is stingy, and I open myself to, this is how I feel about it, and I get curious with myself, I wonder if it's true, I wonder if it's not. I have the potential of having a new experience about how he deals with money. And at one point I might get an insight and realize that I was off. I totally didn't understand this. I don't know, maybe he's responsible, maybe I'm a spender. I'm just making up a story because we're talking about before life, not how to manage what is already.
It's absolutely true. Does anyone, well, here's what I'm gonna try to do. I'm gonna try to take what Fahey just said, I'm gonna try to illustrate it with this green marker, okay?
Go green.
Go green. So we've got over here, we've got a world, and you're in your world. Those are feet. Okay? And we've got things that are in our world. We've got our house, we've got our car. I've practiced making that many times. And we've got our family. That includes people we like and don't like for some of us. In our world, we've got our past. We've got the weather.
Money.
We've got the
Big one, make that one right there. Big dollar bill. Yeah. A lot of it, right?
money. That's a dollar sign. We've got all these things in our world, right? And then there's you, and you've got a feeling. Now, your feeling will include all the way from one end of the spectrum is everything's wonderful, everything's great, isn't it? Aren't I lucky to be alive? I want more of this. And then there's all the way at the other end of the spectrum, which is life sucks. I can't get it together. This is horrible. Why am I wasting another moment here? Okay, so that's all the way at the other end of the spectrum. It's all included in your little feeling there, that little feeling circle. It's all of it. I'm talking about all of that feeling that you can possibly have. And if you want to widen that spectrum to even stuff that's even more than joyous, it's ecstatic, it's divine. Come up with any word you want, sublime. Or you can come up with words at the other end also that are probably more descriptive than I might want to use up here. I'm including that too, right? Now, what we've been trying to say here for the first few minutes is, how do we understand how this gets created? Not how to change it, but how does it get there in the first place? Now, if you have a theory that, well, it depends, really. Because, see, when it's raining, I feel rotten. And when it's not raining, I feel good. So you got the weather to account for. But wait a second, you think to yourself, but even when it's raining, but I win the lottery, well, I feel great. But wait a minute, even if it's raining and I win the lottery, but someone really close to me passes away, then I don't feel good. I mean, it just goes on and on. I mean, you can see how many, no matter what theory you come up with, you're going to have a scenario that maybe doesn't quite fit. But all your theories are going to include, well, sometimes it's this, and sometimes it's that. It depends how my mother diapered me when I was 4, or 3, or whatever it is when she took me off of diapers. It depends how my father treated me today. And all that stuff is somehow or another within our current understanding of what it is that drives my feeling right now. We've all got a lot of theories about that. Now, what the principles are, forget about what the principles are. What the principles do is they narrow it down, and they put a big X on just about everything here. Just about. In fact, you know what? It puts an X on all those things completely. And none of those things have the power, the ability, I don't know, what's another adjective for that? The strength, the impetus, the wherewithal to create your feeling in the moment. It just doesn't have it. Even if it wanted to, and even if you wanted it to. These things, there's no wire that's connecting the weather to
to your innards. Apple is working on a special USB port, but they haven't come up with it yet. Instead, what the principles do is they narrow it down to a single paradigm. A single direction through which your experiences in the moment do get created. And what a paradigm means is that it only works one way. So it's not like there can be mixed paradigms, like sometimes it works this way and sometimes it works that way. We're going back to the absolute required elements for you to have an experience. Doesn't make any difference if it's a good experience, doesn't make any difference if it's a bad experience. You need certain chemicals in order to create, I don't know, dish soap, right? Well, you need certain elements to create a feeling. If even one of these elements are missing, you will have no feeling. Not just a bad feeling, you'll have no feeling. You'll have no experience. Does anyone have any questions about what I mean by paradigm? Because this is really key.
Another way of saying would be a principle.
Well, we're going to get to the principles are within the paradigm, immediately. But does anyone have any questions about what I mean by paradigm? It only works one way, even if you think that it works another way. And I thought it worked many other ways. Even all along my journey of thinking, well, this has something to do with it, and that has something to do with it, the other thing has something to do with it. Even though I had all those opinions and those misunderstandings about how it worked, it still just worked this one way. And it always did. It's not like I need to think it into working this way. It works this way. It's like gravity. I don't care if you believe in gravity or not. It works. Okay? We don't need you to be like, all right, may the force be with you or something. It just doesn't, you don't need that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a force of nature that's already in play.
So I understand what you're saying psychologically, for a person to be able to experience his emotions differently. However, how do you explain this in the real world, where if someone's getting run over by a car or someone is being chased by a lion, there's something real and there are consequences?
Yes, great. So what he's asking is, well, that's real nice that to think or believe that your experience in the moment is being created through thought. But what if a lion is coming at you, or a bus in your scenario? The results will be the same, whether you know about mind consciousness or thought, or not. This is not, it's not going to help you. Well, that's a great thing to point out, because the principles are not a description of what is in the world. It's a description of what you are aware of, what you are experiencing. So there may be a lion coming around the corner with blood in its eyes. But if I am not gifted through the paradigm of mind consciousness and thought that it's there, I won't even know to run. It just won't exist for me. It just won't exist. If I look at someone and don't see their flaws, they won't have any flaws for me. It's just how it works. It's like it's that powerful. Even the physical things that we are aware of are only available to us through mind consciousness and thought. Those are the 3 Ps, and I'll let you do the 3 Ps, right? But so too, the urges that we have and the opinions that we think are coming from the world, or whatever it is that we see about how the world is, it's all being generated this one way.
Quick example. Does everybody feel the chair underneath them?
Now, yes.
Did you feel it before? Pretty darn physical thing. Not part of your experience.
But it's hard to distinguish, because when you have a thought that is not something physical, we can sit here and talk about our experience of that. But when you're talking about something physical, which tells me that I am experiencing my life through cars and jobs and things that are real, it's hard to really understand the emotional part of it, that it works a little bit differently.
Well, yeah, exactly. In fact, it's impossible. If if what the paradigm has been bringing you until now is an understanding that the way your world is created has nothing to do with the paradigm, which it can do. The paradigm is so good at creating what you see that it can create stuff in a way that completely distorts or hides the fact that this is where it came from. You'll never be able to see through that until the paradigm kind of touches you on the shoulder and says, hey, remember me? I'm the one that's creating these special effects. It's coming this way. You can't make that up. You can't tell yourself to see it that way. Either the paradigm shows it to you or it doesn't show it to you. And at any given moment, I either can see it or I don't see it. I can't actively change, oh, well now I'm going to remind myself of the paradigmatic direction of how my experience is being created and I love you now. Well, no, that doesn't quite work that way. But I know when I've completely lost sight of it. Like I know when I'm being lied to. That's more and more often I can see that how I am looking at this world, I know it wasn't true. I saw once, deep enough, that even in the moments that I can't see it out of my eyes, I saw once in my heart that this is the way it works. So that even in the moments that my heart doesn't see it, I still remember, like, wait a minute. I know it feels like the weather's doing this, but I know it doesn't work that way. And I know it feels really bad, but I know it's not true. It's not inherently true. And there are benefits from that. Do you want to take a shot at the actual three principles so that we at least do what we set out to do here?
Now we know what doesn't work.
Just to clarify your question, because it's a big question. Reality exists. We're not here to tell you this chair isn't here if it is, or if you have a car and it breaks down, then it didn't break down, if your bank account only has $3 in it, then it doesn't have, right? All of those things are realities. What the principles is pointing to is about the experience that we have. There's a beautiful Mishnah, part of our oral tradition in Breakout that asks, who is a wealthy person? And answers with two words, a somech bechelko, somebody who takes joy and pleasure in what they do have. And so what that's pointing to is, I may have $1 million in my bank account and feel unbelievably poor. It may be hard for us to think about that, but there are people out there that have $1 million in their bank account who feel poor. And I may have $3 in my bank account and feel incredibly, blessed. And so you gotta, I think one of the questions the principles brings out is, what's more important? The concrete reality or my experience of the reality? What good is my wealth if I feel poor? But that's what the Mishnah is suggesting, that the experience of wealth has nothing to do with being happy. The experience of poverty has nothing to do with what you have. The experience of happiness has nothing to do with what you have. And I call that the key to the prison. Because otherwise, good luck getting the world to cooperate. I've been working on that for a while.
Quick question, please. When I hear both you use the word my experience, it's not what I went through, it's what I'm feeling, right?
Well, it could be, but it could be what I perceive as well. It could very much be. In other words, I have a conversation with somebody, you have two people having a conversation, and it's not just how they feel, but they literally, if you ask them, right, what conversation they had, right, they have two completely different experiences of that, right?
But usually, in the past, I used to use the word experience, my father hit me or something in the past, as an experience that I went through. What I hear in these rooms is experiencing what I'm feeling now, right?
That is a major component of your experience, but it can be even more than just, I think, emotions. It can be what, like I said, I didn't notice the chair until I drove down a street that I drive down for 12 years and didn't even notice that there was a thing on that street. That thing was not part of my experience. It was their reality, but it was not part of my world.
My experience.
My world is my world. It's what I live in. So I've been tasked to talk about the actual three principles. Drum roll. The three principles. What actually are these three principles? Are these people ever going to talk about them? That's too sick around them the whole time. Yeah. So the three principles are just essentially three concepts. And as Tzvi said before, when we talk about principles, we're talking about things that are universal. In other words, it doesn't, gravity works for me, it works for you, it works for everybody. They're universal, they're constant. Gravity doesn't take a day off on Wednesdays, okay? It's always happening. So the beauty of the principles is it's talking about what we all share as human beings. And it points to three forces, whatever, elements. Okay, I like elements, nice
That's
and clean,
cute.
nice and clean elements. Three elements that are in the universe that are responsible for every single experience that has ever taken place on this planet from the beginning of time until the very end of time. And those three things, to put them out here, I've given away the secret sauce over here. Here, one of them is called mind. One of them is called thought. And one of them is called, here's the word, there it is, one I can never spell, conscious.
Yes.
Did I do it? I know somebody's working on it.
It's close enough.
I know somebody's working in Seattle, is working on whiteboards that have spell check, whiteboard technology. Still waiting for that one. Getting a certificate for that. So what are these, and we're going to try to talk about something, and the way we understand this is we're talking about something that's a lot bigger than what we're saying. In other words, we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best to talk about what these things are. So please view this as an attempt at best to try to point to something which is really, much bigger than the words that I'm using. But mind, as I understand it, and you'll hear different people talk about it throughout the day, hopefully throughout the 3 days. Mind is the universal intelligence behind life. There's a wisdom, there's a chachma. We would say chachma, right? Hashem created the world with chachma. The world is an expression of a very deep wisdom. And there's an energy behind life. That chachma is what animates. It's what brings life into being. It's what brings everything. It's sort of you plug the plug in and it comes alive. Well, that's mind. And since it's universal, we all share in it. We all have a piece of that within us. There's something that brings us to life. And there is within us a very profound intelligence and wisdom and goodness and health. And that's what mind is really pointing to. We certainly have this within our tradition, as I love that Dickon was teaching us Mishnah, or I should say, it's actually more, that the famous story of the angel teaching us, that's what that story is really teaching us, is that we have within us an incredible amount of wisdom, which we have forgotten, but we rediscover. We get insight about that, and that's what insight really is. Insight is literally, as Sid says, it's the sight within. Occasionally I get a glimpse of a piece of wisdom, of some understanding, of some deeper vision that I may never have had any inkling before of, but just shows up as a gift. And all of a sudden, life looks different. I see something deeper, I see something more. That's what mind is. So there's an energy, there's a power, there's a force within us that animates all of existence. And one of the ways that it materializes is through this thing called thought. I don't need to tell people too much about thought because I think we're all well acquainted with thought, right? Okay? We can't but be acquainted with thought because thought is what we do constantly. We are working overtime, right? Thought I would describe as kind of like a river that is kind of happening within us. Now, on some level, you could say, well, it's coming from me, right? Nobody else is doing my thinking for me. Some people have tried. But it's coming from me. But on the other hand, it's much bigger than that because I don't have a terrible amount of control, right? Anybody look inside of everybody ever take a moment to sort of just, listen, put their ear to the ground, inside of themselves and get a sense of how much traffic is going on in there, thought traffic, right? Talk about rush hour traffic. Is this something that people can identify with? Has anybody ever tried to meditate and get quiet their mind down? Your mind it doesn't exactly cooperate necessarily, right? There's an amazing amount of thought. So there's an energy that's constantly coming through, and it materializes in thought. And thought it can be anything at any moment. You know, you get crazy thoughts that pop into your head sometimes. I never would have even imagined. The last principle of consciousness is it's our ability to be aware of our lives. And so what that does inside of us is, this is the gift I mentioned earlier, which is that we have thinking, and thinking comes to us all the time. Our consciousness, in a sense, kind of at times seizes on a thought and brings the thought to life. So like it's like all of a sudden it's not a thought anymore. It's reality. It's my reality. This is my world right now. And what I'm not seeing, however, is my world is actually constructed, is made up by me via my thinking that I bring to life via my consciousness. I use an analogy sometimes, if I may, that works for me, which is sort of sitting, I know not everybody here goes to movies, but imagine if you're sitting in your chair in the movie theater, right, and watching the screen over there. So behind you is this thing called the projector, right? And it's got a little plug that plugs into the wall, okay? That plug, think of that as mind. Think of that as the universal energy behind life. Everything has its source in that. But that energy materializes via this stream of light that heads towards the screen. And if you were sitting here smoking your cigarette, you would see that, right, that light, right, coming through that smoke, but also bring that alive, a stream of light. So the way I think of it is like thought is like a stream of thought. It's like someone left the garden hose on, right? It's constantly happening. And when that thought hits the screen, when that light hits the screen, boom, what happens? It becomes a full color sense around experience, right? So you could see, like there was a movie called Saving Private Ryan. I never saw that movie before. It was the opening scene is about the landing at Normandy Beach, or D-Day, and they produced this scene so realistically that when I saw it, I think I was curled up. I was curled up like I could barely handle. And if somebody had come at that moment and attached, EKG things, put something around my head, and take my pulse and my perspiration and my brain waves and my breathing, my respiration, right? They would have basically, if they were in a dark room in the back, I think they would have said, hey, we got someone who's in combat right now. That's what we do on a regular basis. That's what the principles are basically saying. They're telling us that we produce our experience, and we produce it by sort of an alchemy, by a mixing of three gifts, three elements that are part of who we are, inseparable parts of who we are. They're the very essence of who we are on some level, the very essence of who we are. That those things are at work constantly, whether we know they're at work, whether we don't know it, right? That paradigm that we've been talking about, that outside-in paradigm, that belief that rather than my experience coming from within me as a thought, but rather it's produced by everything in my world, we're not suggesting that that's an alternate possibility. That's an alternate possibility in terms of what you might want to live in terms of your own illusion. But there's really only one reality is what we're suggesting. That's what these principles are suggesting, which is that every single moment of your life is a production that you have unwittingly and unknowingly perhaps even produced, and that's what you live in. That's what creates all the feelings you have. That's what creates what you notice. That's what creates what you don't notice. That's what creates what makes an impression on you, what doesn't make an impression on you. how is this, anybody have any questions on what I just,
keeps like going back to, if that's a paradigm, and that's, these are the three principles, why isn't it naturally a part of us? Why do we have to work so hard to make it part of us?
it's beautiful, it's a great question. You know, it says in Breakout, it says, Ethics of Our Fathers is the mission. It talks about free will, and it says that, and I don't remember the exact washing, the exact language, but it says, essentially, blessed is God because He's created us with free will, but even greater is the fact that He told us. Okay? In other words, we're human by default, but there is an awareness component. There is an awareness component when we understand what it means to be human. And what we're suggesting is when we don't understand what it means to be human, we unwittingly create experiences, feelings, however you want to say it, that oftentimes don't serve us very well. And so you're right. We are, you know, I remember I was doing this seminar with Tzvi in Baltimore a couple of months ago, and some guy says, "This is great for you. You live in the principles." I'm like, well, guess what? You do too. You know, like, you're all doing it. Okay, that's the good news. You can all relax. You're all using the three principles beautifully. By the way, you're doing a fantastic job. Right? 3 stars. 2 enthusiastic thumbs up. Okay. The only issue that's really, I think, what separates, so to speak, the men from the boys, is, do I know? Do I know that I'm behind my experience? And as simple as that might sound to you, what we're suggesting is that is a very big game changer. Silence. Tzvi, do you have any questions? Do you feel good? Would you like to add something?
I think we can end 3 days.
That's it. I think we actually are at the end of our time, actually, it's a quarter.
Well, I guess knowing that the principles are true, and as a result, that would inform me that as many people that are in this room, that'll be the number of experiences or ways that people heard us present or heard what Mark just said. There are 20-something ways that it was just listened to. Knowing that, there's a possibility that some people did not really see any value in that. I mean, it's pretty crazy, but it's possible, right? So I'd like to leave you with with an invitation to not necessarily agree or disagree with what Mark just put forth or what we're suggesting, so to speak. But to consider, is this a possibility? Like, is this true? Because if it's true, there's some pretty wild implications. It would make a big difference if it's true. Like, that might make a huge difference. Every time they discover principles in a field, it's considered eureka. There are things that are possible today that were not possible until Einstein came along and discovered his theory of relativity, his general theory of relativity. I think one of them, I don't understand it. It's something to do with space and time, and it warps and bends, but I only have a cell phone today that works based on GPS, which is completely rooted in what he's discovered, according to Wikipedia. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's accurate. There are things that are true or possible. There are limitations that get removed that you may have now, right currently, in place, just because we've had a misunderstanding about how it works. And by learning how or considering how it works, discovering how it really works, limitation gets removed. That'll happen automatically. Automatically. You don't have to do any of that removal yourself. Any of that removal yourself. Once you've been touched or blessed with a recognition of how it works, these things will become apparent to you more and more often. So I suggest that even if you're only here for today, continue listening, and whether it's here or somewhere else, it doesn't make a difference to us where this occurs to you. It doesn't make a difference to us. I'm pretty sure it doesn't make a difference to you, Mark, whether you credit it to us or not.
We want you to live healthier, more limitless lives, and this affords that for you. We're gonna have lunch now. I heard it's supposed to be really good. So thank you all for
That's
joining
your
us.
perception.
Thank you.
Thank you guys, thank you very much.
Not my.
Yeah,
Good to see you again.